We are following the crucial developments in Parliament as the Finance Portfolio Committees convene to finalise its report on the 2025 budget. The budget process has faced delays and debate mainly over the Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana's revised proposal for a phased 0.5% VAT increase. The ANC and the DA have been negotiating for weeks to reach a compromise. The DA's finance spokesperson, Dr. Mark Burke, is joining us now to have the discussion around what his party's stance is as it currently stands. Dr. Burke, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us this morning. So the joint finance committees are meeting in less than 2 hours' time to debate on this budget. Where does the DA stand on this? What will your MPs be contributing to that debate at 9 o'clock this morning?
The DA's position around the budget has been quite firm from the start, which is that we need to protect South Africans from paying taxes that they can't afford. And at the same time, we need to focus on an efficient government that creates jobs by providing the environment that allows businesses to grow the economy. So the DA will be focused on a budget that delivers that. The fiscal framework report that this committee will now be deliberating on for the course of this morning is but the first step in a budget cycle. After this report might go to Parliament tomorrow, there are 3 other bills, being the Division of Revenue Bill, the Appropriations Bill, and finally the Tax Laws Amendments Bill that needs to. So it's important to indicate to South Africans that this is the first step, and at every step of the way, the DA's position will be to try and shield South Africans from excessive taxes and at the same time grow the economy.
Yeah, you used the word might go to Parliament tomorrow. Is there any indication that it could not go to Parliament tomorrow? Will the DA be making any amendment proposals?
Let's just quickly touch on how these committees work and who sits on them. So the Standing Committee on Finance has 11 members, like all the other committees in Parliament. And of the 11 members, there's 2 DA members, 4 ANC members, 2 MK, 1 EFF, and then a collection of the smaller parties make up the other 2 seats. In the case of the Finance Committee, that's Action SA and IFP. So what I can't tell you is what all the parties today will vote for or against in the committee. But what I can tell you is that the DA is quite firm and we haven't digressed at all from our budget position. So the word might indicates to you and hopefully to your audience that I have no idea what the other committee members might or might not do.
Yeah, but still the DA, or let me say the Government of National Unity, still remains the majority as a collective in those various committees. Have you had a chat with the other parties in the Government of National Unity outside of the ANC?
Well, I think there's almost 2 questions in there. The one has got to do with which direction the GNU will vote. And then the second question is whether the DA has been bilaterally engaging with other GNU partners that's not the ANC. Almost for both of those questions, I have to, for posterity, indicate that I'm but the spokesperson on finance. I'm not actively in the negotiations with our counterparts, although, of course, I maintain cordial relationships with my colleagues across the committees. The conversation between the ANC and the DA is constructive and ongoing. And I'm encouraged, because I'm deep down an optimist, that, South Africans know how to work together. We're resilient. And so we remain hopeful. I remain hopeful that we're able to find solutions together. And I can't tell you whether the ANC has spoken to people inside or outside the GNU, but what I can tell you is the DA remains committed to the GNU.
Yeah, so you wouldn't know whether your party, when it comes to the budget, would have had any conversation with other members of the Government of National Unity, now specifically dealing with the GNU members, not those outside of the GNU?
So if you're asking whether we had bilateral conversations with, for example, the IFP,
yeah,
I don't have that level of detail. I would indicate to you that the mathematics of how the GNU is constructed means that unless the ANC and the DA can agree on something, there's not much point, except, of course, for taking collaborative input from colleagues. There's not much negotiating point in either party engaging with other GNU members in the absence of engaging with the 2 biggest partners in the GNU. So just from a mathematics perspective, there is this need for us to find each other as the ANC and the DA, and then, of course, to consult with our colleagues in the other parties. But mathematically, those conversations just don't add up. the votes needed.
Yeah, and it seems to me that that is what has actually been playing out, is that while you have so-called 10 members of the Government of National Unity, of course a smaller number when it comes to the executive and those who have positions in the executive, that the negotiation is taking place between the ANC as well as the Democratic Alliance at the exclusion of other political parties, at least listening to what you've just said now. So the DA doesn't see it worthy negotiating in a bilaterals with any of the other members of the GNU.
Sometimes when a friend that I haven't spoken to for a while phones me, I simply don't have the capacity to see them for dinner that night. That doesn't mean that they're not worthy of my time. It means that on my list of priorities, I'm focusing on the highest impact relationships. It's much the same in the GNU. We value the other partners in the GNU, and with some of them we work at a local level in good collaboration. The fact that we aren't able at all points to constantly engage with parties that don't bring the numbers in the GNU doesn't mean we don't value them. Much the same with a friendship.
Okay. One of the proposals, or some of the proposals at least, that I've seen that have been reported on are some concessions, for instance, with the Expropriation Act, the NHI Act as well. Are those still on the table that has been, are those still proposals that have been put on the table by the Democratic Alliance, or have you moved somewhat away from that?
I don't resent you for asking, Aldrin, but I couldn't possibly comment on that, partly because even if I did know, I wouldn't be able to tell you.
You wouldn't be able to tell me. So what are the concessions that the DA is willing to make, and what are the concessions that the ANC is willing to make? And I'm also asking this on the basis that we understand that this is a coalition and there will be some compromises that would need to be made.
Yeah, well, let's perhaps start, before we talk about concessions, let's start talking about what it is that the DA believes a budget should entail. And we believe a budget should reflect a government's commitment to efficient spending. And when government then does spend public money, those funds should go towards things like infrastructure investment, which in the short term creates jobs and in the long term creates an environment. From that perspective, if the government's focused on efficient spending for growth and jobs, then you work backwards from there and say, what things will contribute to this? So one of the points that we have insisted on now is Cape Town and Richards Bay are poorly run ports under the behemoth that is Transnet. We need to see those ports devolved and potentially privatized. When we say privatized, we don't mean that the private sector we want the efficiency of the private sector, whatever that looks like, to come and contribute to the equation where our ports are now some of the worst, and we'd like to see them some of the best run ports in the world. So access to rail and ports devolution is one of the things that we've asked for. We've asked for an open electricity network so that the other behemoth that is Eskom that keeps bleeding money can be disintermediated, and private sector participants and households can contribute fairly to the grid and get compensated for that. And then there are other items such as the ones that you've mentioned now. We are deeply concerned that the Expropriation Act would be detrimental to investment in South Africa. So what we're trying to do here is liberalize the South African economy so that it can take off. We know it's got potential. We back the people of South Africa to unlock that potential. But government's getting in the way at the moment. And so we are asking for things out of this budget process that means the economy will grow. And if the economy grows, there will be revenue for government in future years, because, of course, revenue is a proportion of GDP in the form of taxation. So if we grow the economy, there will be sufficient funds so we don't face down the barrel of another crisis in a year from now, because still the economy has grown less than the population has grown. We have a patent problem here, which is the economy needs to take off. And unless that happens, there's no point us arguing about budget line items. And so the concessions that you mentioned that we'll be asking for and that we have been asking for have to do with letting the South African people go. Let them loose. Let this economy take off. Don't get in the way.
Okay. When was the last meeting that you had with the ANC with regards to this?
Again, I'm not in those conversations. I've not bilaterally engaged with the ANC directly on these negotiations. And even if I knew, Aldrin, I wouldn't be able to comment on ongoing negotiations, although our posture remains constructive and open in these conversations.
Sure, but I'm sure you would know when the last meeting is without discussing what the details of that meeting were.
I genuinely don't know when our people last spoke.
Okay. Your federal leader has a press briefing at around 8:30 later on this morning. Has there been a deal that has been struck between the DA and the ANC?
again, if I knew about such a transaction, I wouldn't be able to comment on it. That would be our federal leaders' role to comment on it. And we'll have to wait for 8:30 and see what is announced at that point.
Okay, are you optimistic?
I'm a deep optimist. I've always been, and I remain so. And I want to see South Africa working.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. That is Mark Burke, who is the DA spokesperson on finance.